Hello, and welcome to Minecraft Through the Ages, my series where I've been updating a single Minecraft world through every version ever released and covering all the changes made along the way to both my world and the game. On the subject of that whole every version part of the intro, I've actually got a question I want everyone to answer in the comments below, but I'll have to save that for later. Just, promise me you won't forget. Regardless, in this episode, we'll start by taking our world from classic 0.0.22a_05 and updating it to 0.0.23a_01. This version, released shortly after 23A itself on July the 11th, 2009, is the last version that's been archived from the multiplayer test era of Minecraft's development. As I first mentioned with the start of this mini era back when we updated into it with 15A, these versions are all fairly similar to one another. From 15A onwards, we have gotten some pretty game-changing additions like the inventory and cloth blocks, but nothing like what's coming up with the survival test versions. This rapidly approaching new era of development turns pretty much everything we've known up until this point on its head by adding a brand new survival mode to the game. This means mechanics like mobs, health, and a limited inventory for the first time in this series. We'll get to all these massive changes to the game, and more to come soon, but first we have to cover this final update before survival mode, classic 23A_01. To start, 23A proper is a pretty nice version on the face of it. First looking at the patch notes, you might notice some fairly lovely additions off the bat, with the biggest being the addition of customizable controls. While obviously not necessary for any game to be playable, accessibility or quality of life features such as this one are always a nice touch. As a matter of fact, it seems that Notch agreed, as quality of life is really the main focus of this update, with a lot of nice additions being made to the pause menu along with the newly customizable controls. For example, the changing of one's render distance used to be done by simply pressing the F key, something possible since 0.0.12a. With this update, however, it was removed in favor of the ability to be changed using a setting in the menu. The outright removal of the F key's previous functionality outside of menus was predictably unfavorable amongst the existing player base, and the functionality was actually added back, this time alongside the option in settings, with the following patch 23A_01. Along with this addition to the pause menu, two separate options to turn on and off sounds and music have also been added. This replaces the single mute sound function that the M key was given in the last update, 22A. As well, the visibility of FPS and chunk updates can now also be toggled on or off via the new Show FPS button in the settings. Other than that, the only other keys whose functionality has actually been altered by this update is the Windows key, which has had its binding to jump removed from the code outright. I honestly couldn't tell you if this was a bug fix or something intentional that was changed, as nobody seems to mention it in the IRC chat logs from what I can see, and no actual patch notes exist for the game at this point in time. Now, other than that, there are three big-ish changes to this update that still need to be covered, and I figure I should do them in order of so-called coolness. Least cool, but still nice, is some new multiplayer functionality that came along with this update. Added was the ability for the player to use their mouse to click a name under the tab menu. This will paste the name into the chat, something quite useful both for executing commands as well as simply mentioning people playing the game with you. Second of all, the texture of the menu buttons has been changed. The update takes the texture from this very unfinished looking flat gray texture to a slightly more finished looking sort of textured stone vibe. With this update, the menu probably looks quite familiar to you. Well, I mean it should look familiar to you if you've played any version of Minecraft at any point, as it's literally gone unchanged to this day when I'm writing this nearly 6,000 real-life days after the fact. With that in mind, this is honestly a pretty monumental change, but I mean it when I say that the last change this update makes is by far the most impactful and interesting, despite the why maybe not being as immediately obvious. Last of all, 23A changes how gravity blocks interact with water. I've mentioned in a previous episode that before, when sand or gravel fell on water, they did exactly that, actually falling and landing on top of any liquid blocks as if they were solid ground. My understanding is that this update attempts to fix this bug, but in the process introduces an even more powerful bug that can be exploited to allow an ability not yet granted to the player, that being the ability to finally move liquids at will to any Y level. If you've been following this world and series since before this very episode, you could probably infer just how big a deal this is for the polyworld. Alongside the ore blocks in Bedrock, which itself is now technically available through commands in multiplayer, lava and water were the only other blocks that, while in the game's code, are not actually accessible in the build menu. As of update 23A_01, this is still the case for coal, iron, or gold ore, but thanks to the aforementioned changes made to the way gravity blocks interact with liquids, we can now build with lava and water anywhere in the world up to and below Y level 64, as if we could place it ourselves. The exact reason this is possible is due to the way said gravity block change, or fix, was implemented, but I feel the need to preface the following explanation by saying I haven't actually gone full Magikarp and read the code or anything, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Again, as I understand it, when a player places a gravity block not above a solid block, the game replaces the original position where the gravity block was placed with air, and replaces wherever it falls into with itself. So imagine water or lava replaced with gravel, or air replaced with sand. Normally, you'd think the code would specify to only place air every time, but in actuality, the way that 23A in particular does it is by replacing the original position of whatever gravity block with whatever it's replacing in the world. My guess is that Notch originally wrote it out that way only thinking of how that function works with air, but of course, this ultimately has the unintended side effect of allowing us to, all of a sudden, actually be able to build with and manipulate water and lava anywhere we want. All this just because of a simple attempted bug fix. Funny how that works. Now, considering exactly how fluids work in Classic, you can hopefully see why this bug is extremely useful. It is also for these exact same reasons that this bug can be highly destructive. You can't imagine how many backups I made while making use of this newfound ability, but you also can't believe just how long I've been waiting for my world to make it to this version. Building with water and lava in survival is absolutely trivial with buckets in later versions, and you'd think that the simple and infinite nature of liquids in Classic would maybe allow for more creativity when building. Sadly, reality stipulates you can only use them at and below the preset sea level, something that functions as a huge hindrance to many otherwise creative and possible build ideas. With those barriers now completely broken down, there are a few new build ideas I was able to make, and we still have to tour those later on in this video. But the specific mechanics of this bug also allow for some pretty goofy looking, as well as eventually discontinued setups for different blocks. As I mentioned, it is true that a lot of what I'm building would be possible to replicate when we can place water buckets and whatnot in the future, but it's also true that many setups will become and remain discontinued. As well, as it stands, this is really the only way to build cool stuff like this outside of the use of external tools or modding. So yeah, very cool bug to be sure. I guess just to clarify, many implications of this are cool, but it's really the liquids at any Y level part that's the biggest deal for long-term worlds updating into this version, such as our own. It's also probably the most efficient to just leave a lava and water block at build height and call it a day. You know, that way you can always use some temporary pipes to pipe either or wherever you want in any subsequent update. What I've decided to do instead of strictly seeking the quickest way to get things done was to build a more in-universe solution. My idea was large pipes going to and fro between the different Classic worlds. More specifically, my idea is to build a sort of water collection or testing facility on this side of the world away from the cityscape I've been developing. That way, I'm able to have it all connected via pipes flying overhead all the way to the city, where I want to build a residential sort of water treatment or factory type build with more sort of civil planning. You know, exciting stuff. Anyways, I actually think together both of these builds work quite well, but before we actually go in and look at what we built in detail, I need to highlight this pixel art that will have to be a work in progress until a later update. As it is, I'm currently waiting for some more blocks and colors to actually get added, but I had to get the liquids in place with this update, so there you go. Oh, and just so I don't forget during the tour, the idea for the lighthouse actually came from a suggestion by one Postamble Net in the comments, so thank you. On to the tour. I'll come out the gate by saying you're obviously not watching a tour on Classic 23A. For some reason my computer's just been having problems running a whole host of versions that used to be fine before, but they're running super slow now, so I'll try and figure out a fix for that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to do the tour in Classic Cube, just because that makes it easier. And because, you know, you can sort of, if I just quickly cheat and fly up, you know, you can see the whole world all at once. So I think it's a nice viewing experience. That being said, I just want to show off everything I've been building. No reason to explain exactly why it's been so long, you know. I've just been busy. That's really the lame but sadly accurate answer. I just really haven't had the time since building a bunch of this stuff to actually edit together the recording of me doing so. So yeah, I have probably missed a number of things that I've built, so if you see them in the background, mention them. But I haven't missed this. This was one of the first things I did. We're over by the Pantheon. Now the Pantheon I built originally to house all the different blocks in the game, but I decided I wanted to do a different sort of mini one for the liquids. So over here now we've got the water and lava. And you know, because of the way that they're able to be moved, they don't actually get updated. They're static when they move. So I figured you could display them. I should display them like that in a fancy sort of way. Now we're obviously over here in the classic 14A world for the start of the tour, and that's because that's actually where a majority of my, well, maybe not a majority, a lot of my work has taken place. I started out by building, I might have referred to it in the voiceover as a water treatment facility, but really over here is the water testing facility. I wanted to build sort of two connected water facilities across the world, and they are now connected, as you see, with this ginormous pipe. And that's exactly what I did. So this is the first half. This is the water testing facility. And you can see I put a big sign on the lawn here that says lab, because it's really more of a laboratory than it is like a water treatment facility. I built it to sort of do a lot of scientific testing and whatnot. You can imagine this big vat has like a thermometer or whatever being probed in it right now. But in reality, the actual purpose was because I just wanted to have a little localized area where I could sort of flood the whole zone and not have to worry about flooding the whole world when messing with the 23A water mechanics. So, you know, you got the lava and water here ready to be experimented on. And generally, I really do actually like the look of this build. I think it's really quite nice, even being, you know, slightly nonsensical. Like, I think that these waves on the wall and everything, it's actually a really nice design. Anyways, there's also a back garden here that's very well kept. Got like the artificial, you can imagine it's like freshly mowed lines, and these sort of like aspen tree design, and the lawnmower. I really like the lawnmower. The trees were sort of inspired by, I was looking at old screenshots of classic builds that were like done way back when in 2009, and a number of them actually had like custom trees built, which I figured like how haven't I done that yet? I mean, obviously, you know, we have the 14A trees and the 14A_03 trees that I've been building around, but I haven't actually done a whole lot of custom trees, so that's something I've focused on implementing more. Obviously, the Menger's sponge is a big thing in the 14A world. If you actually look, it's like the Star Destroyer, the horse, and the Pantheon, and maybe the little house that I have over there, and that's pretty much it other than this imposing Menger's sponge. So I decided to sort of expand it a little bit with the path. You can see under here, is it? Somewhere. I've got a sponge holding back this water. Anyways, somewhere there's sponge holding back the water, but under here it's a similar deal. I sort of wanted to have the path all be connected, and this used to just sort of be all messy underneath, so making it a bit more fancy, connecting all the builds up as well. I had a general goal here in this episode to connect a lot more of the builds across the worlds, because I've been doing lots of different separate projects, but I think it's nice to have sort of paths all going between them, or, you know, giant water pipes feeding the water between them. So that's what all this is. That Torii Gate and that path there is all new, and this path is also new, which will eventually connect up both, I think, this sort of like cartoony barn area with the newly suggested lighthouse, which I really like. This is a really, really good suggestion. Whoever, I'll say it in the edit, whoever actually suggested this lighthouse, but it looks really good. And the idea that I had to use the lava actually as the lamp, I think, works out really well. It's a perfectly timed suggestion. I can't imagine that was intentional, but it works really well. The interior here I also found to be a real joy to come up with, because, you know, lighthouses are generally pretty cramped interiors. Like, they've got a bunch of people living all in the middle of, you know, some barren rock, and often it is sort of a busy place, so I found it easy to replicate. You can imagine maybe this is like some fuel or something for the lamp up here that you can service. Big fan of the way this came together. The fact that lava is like the only block that actually gives off any amount of light at this time, like in these updates, and you're just now able to move it, I felt like it was, yeah, too perfect not to make it be the light, the titular light of the lighthouse. So yeah, that about covers it for this area. I did show off, well, I hope I showed off at some point the time lapse of me actually flooding all of this stuff, and the spiral over there, the little sort of spirally liquids. But that's pretty much it for this area. The other thing that I filled in here was this tank. This isn't actually something new, this tank with fish in the, I think, 11A world. but it has not been filled with water for a very, very long time. So stuff like that is nice to be able to finally check off the list. That, and also actually the bean shop. You can see there the little bean tank. Let me get on a little closer. Yeah, over by the ginormous lava pool, when the texture, I think in 17A, changed to look a lot like beans, I built this little like bean stand where you can imagine it sort of pumping the beans out of the ground and storing them here, and then sort of you can crank them out into your bowl. And now it's actually got the lava in here, which I think definitely changes up the look, makes it look a lot nicer. Sort of, finally solidifies the vision for the build, because that was my plan all along, but just wasn't able to actually realize the plan until now. Other than the water testing facility over there, and the water treatment facility, and the stuff I've built in the sort of new modern area, the main work that I've been putting in over here is actually on this parkour. Wow, I call it the parkour. There is now a parkour section. It's mainly supposed to be like a fun land. Originally, it was more of like a theme park in my mind, was more of what I was planning this smaller area to be, but it's sort of turned into more of a carnival, because there's only so many rides you can actually build in Classic. There's not that much movement going on. It's all more static. So I've added in this iron golem. I think he's new at least, but this was just sort of some empty space. So I, over here, added in like the mushroom and an iron golem and whatnot. Also added in this sort of dropper ride. This is all new, but you can imagine what these are, right? Like you jump onto your little seat here, you get strapped in, and then it like brings you up and quickly drops you down. As well as a little viewing platform out here for the the two mushrooms. Obviously, you can see one of the major additions was this giant circus tent, which I had the idea for a long time ago, but was just waiting for the addition of cloth to actually be able to do it. Similarly, I was watching, when I was actually building this circus, I was watching a video about Disneyland's Tomorrowland. I guess that Disney World also has a Tomorrowland, but they had that big rocket that used to sit there, and I thought, while I was looking at the red and white wool, that it would be a perfect fit to build that in my little fun land here. So that's exactly what I did. As well as, built a little like entryway into the rocket. But the main attraction of this area now, seemingly, is this big circus tent where you've got like you can imagine like Evel Knievel riding up and through the ring of fire here, as well as this this elephant that I built. I'm unironically really proud of the elephant. I feel like this is a great build. Bouncing on the ball. Came together quite well. This idea I thought was going to be pretty easy. I don't know why I thought that for some reason, but actually building this, it was like a serious nightmare, getting all the stripes to line up and to get the shape to actually look good. Well, the shape to look good and to actually have enough space to build an elephant. But yeah, I think it came together really nicely. This is definitely one of my favorite builds that I've done recently. Other than that, this is the fun land mostly covered. It's pretty much all over in the modern area that's new. Well, I guess I should also show off. I don't know if I've ever shown off in video, but there's another fractal that I built inside here made out of sponge. Pretty much just trying to fill the space. A number of these pyramids, well, I think all of them when I originally built them were just completely empty. And if I had to guess, I think this grass one still is entirely empty, but I want to try and do stuff like that, filling out the little corners of the world that I've left as I go along, because it's easy enough to do that sort of in between recording sessions. Alright, it kind of pisses me off that this gray wool is like the wrong color, but it's my fault for playing Classic Cube, so I can't really complain about my texturing not looking as good. Anyways, let's look at these buildings here. I've got one more slot here that I've yet to fill, but I just wanted to sort of build some more generic shops and whatnot to fill out the modern area. So we've got like a restaurant here with like the cooler and the counter where you can sort of come up and have a nice sandwich, maybe sit down, as well as over here. I think this one's like a sponge shop, where up above you've got like the sponge cutter, and then you can sell them down below. It's sort of hard to say exactly when this world takes place. Like, this area specifically I've been calling like the modern area, but really like this building looks a lot more modern than that one, so who knows. Whenever I build modern, it usually ends up being really more like the year 1900 and not actually anything that close to modern day. But I want to try and do a good job setting this like present day. This is the water treatment facility for real. I really actually do like this build. I did some like trucks and whatnot for the front of it, which I think came out quite nicely. But I just want to go to these buildings first. The goal was to have them be all sort of different shapes, to not have it just be, you know, a bunch of boxes all in the middle of the town. So this one's a little bit more on an angle, and that one on the far side is quite skinny. I think the plan for this was to sort of just have it be more of like a gas station kind of convenience store. You can come in here, you know, got like the coolers and the rack with like the the granola bars and whatnot, and up here is like a desk sort of setup. You can imagine these are like cubicles where maybe some different people they have offices or whatnot. And I do like having a little back alley exit here, but you know, I've yet to sort of decorate the actual like pavement and whatnot back here, because I haven't decided what I want that final building to be. In here, I think it's a clothing store, if I remember correctly. Yeah. This the two pieces of wool, one on top of the other, is a classic world, you know, decorating life hack, but it's sort of hard to decide what it's going to be every time. But this one's this clothing store. You can imagine up here they've got like the sewing machines maybe where they're making the clothes, and down below they've got the, you know, the actual store where you can buy them. I remember for this one, I wanted to have a way to get into the to get into like the clerks section, but I didn't like how it looked when you could actually step down into there, so I've just got the one extra block, sort of blocking it up, you know, just to make it look a little bit nicer. But I don't think it's that much of a big deal to have to, you know, break something to get in, because there's only so much you can do with an actually full block only build. And finally there's, yeah, this little skinny guy, another sort of clothing store-esque vibe, but this time rather than having the sewing machines upstairs, you can imagine it's maybe like the person who actually lives here, right? That's like the owner of the shop that sleeps above the actual clothing store. This one also has a basement that I built here, which was inspired by something very particular. I was watching, it was Bingus Chondo's video where he did a tour of the Minecraft 2009, the Minecon 2009 like classic world, and in it there was like an underground, like a little weird back alley where he went underground, and there was like a dance party, and I just thought that was too cool not to sort of replicate. So this is a pretty much I want to say just one-to-one rip of the exact way that it went, because yeah, it was like a little sort of, you know, back alley staircase that opened up into this big room that had this dance party sign on the walls. I don't know, I feel like this is so jank and yet so inspired. Like, I don't know, I think it's really cool having this little club underneath one of the buildings. And I mean, it's sort of akin to reality, right? Like, there's usually lots of like hole-in-the-wall establishments where you can go, you know, go to get a bar. Oh, that was a good... You know what? I considered just straight saying to cut that out, but that's funny. We're leaving that voice crack in. The bar. No clue why that was such a struggle to say. Anyways, we got the water treatment facility over here. I'm gonna be honest and admit my main inspiration behind the sort of shape of this building was I wanted to do something like Flush Factory. I like that sort of like two different sort of industrious buildings connected to each other look. So that's exactly what I did. One thing I want to highlight here, I just got to build up on these trucks. I've built a bunch of these different trailers where it's got like water, you know, ready to be transported, but in most of them I've done this sort of like layering with the water, because when you use, I think it actually isn't like this in the official one. I think this is flown out. I think it's like this. When you use the 23A water mechanics, you can get sort of like detailed little like extra bits of water like this, and I think it looks quite nice. A nice little design. But anyways, we'll walk around here and show off the little back here. There isn't actually, I don't think, a way you could possibly drive your truck down and through here, but you can imagine this is the path where you would drive your truck to pick up like a newly treated I don't know, tank of water. Speaking of tanks, lots of tanks back here. This is where the water arrives. It comes all the way in this tube, all the way over, and then finally empties out into this big vat, where it then sort of goes underground, up and around, and into the facility. You can imagine maybe they're doing like some sort of testing here, or, I don't know, desalination or something. I really did like the idea of having like a big nuclear waste barrel, like a big drum attached to one of these tanks, and I think that the like, you know, cartoonish classic colors does a good job actually with portraying that. In here you can waltz on in through the garage and come on up and around into the treatment facility. And now it might seem like it would have been a pain to build all this, like all the different pipes and everything, and, you know, not have it spray everywhere, because it's pretty easy to just have one block missing, and that way you have to do a whole reset and everything, because then the whole world floods. But I don't know, I actually did find it rather enjoyable, making sure that everything was like sealed and getting it all ready to be flooded. I found it a fun process. You know, I liked having it also so you could jump in here into the tank. That way you can sort of swim up and get a different look around the area. And I think this just spits you out. Yeah, this does actually fully connect on in through to the pipes. So you can imagine if you jumped in here, you could travel the full length on all the way over to the water testing facility. But yeah, that's mainly it. I'm just trying to remember if there was anything else major. Oh yeah, the giant flower. I guess I can quickly sprint on over there. I said that one of my goals for this episode was just sort of connecting the different areas, connecting it with the water tubes and everything, and one way that I decided to do that, now that I've bounded over, was with this giant flower. Eventually, I do plan to get rid of these ugly leaves, because as it stands currently, that it doesn't actually look that nice, but the plan is to have this flower be a way to get from one world to another, because previously, if you were in this world and you wanted to get over to the, you know, very first world that I created, the only way to do so was to go all the way around into another world. But now I've changed things up and I've built this giant version of the rose. You can sort of see, you know, it's like a very much scaled up version. And the plan is to eventually, in this sort of stem, have there be like a ladder, right, that you can climb up, and then eventually it's built in a way that you can jump down onto this platform, and this has like a connection up to all four corners. But as it stands currently, there are no ladders in the game, so I've just had to put these vines on the side, which look a little bit ugly in all honesty, but it is what it is. I don't think it really detracts from the build that much, and it does actually give it its functionality back in Classic, which is probably more important than anything. Though, that being said, the way that I have this set up, it's actually quite the challenge to actually climb it. Like, how am I going to do this jump? Oh, like that. Alright, as soon as I asked, I was given the answer. Here we go. And now, oh my god, okay, we're fine. I thought I fell all the way down there. That would have been tragic. Okay, we're good. Just like that, we are now up on top of this flower, which I think is a nice way to end off the tour, getting a nice overview like this. Usually in Classic, it's so laggy that I have to have my fog up, but this way you can really see just the extent of how much we've been able to build so far. Yeah. Man, touring everything, you can really get a sense of the scale. There's a lot to see. Oh, fell down. But yeah. Oh, you can imagine I made that. Then you fall right on up here. You can get to this world, climb up this nice little staircase here, and you'll end up at the rose. And this is my demonstration that I used for the sound, the breaking of sounds and what that sounded like. Yeah. On with the video. Alright, in terms of builds and features, that's everything new covered. I will say, it's honestly been a while since I last recorded a building update / tour, so if you saw something in the background that I left unaddressed, be sure to mention it in the comments. Speaking of which, here's the question I mentioned at the start of the video, wanting everyone to answer below. Do you think I should use saving mods for versions of the game that I could play but normally don't save? The time to ask is now, because with all I've covered in this video out of the way, we've actually covered everything I can think to look at before the survival test phase of the game. I could bring up the JavaScript remake of 23A that was made to celebrate its 10th year anniversary, but I'm actually just planning on saving that for another time. I've got a lot of notes for stuff I want to talk about before we leave Classic, so expect a big Classic extravaganza video at the end. Regardless, the next archive version of Minecraft, Classic 0.25 Survival Test, is the first that actually has no way to save the game outside of modding it in. There are already mods that do add saving to this version made, but that would obviously not be within the bounds of what I feel should be called strictly vanilla, so it'd be easy enough to just skip playing these versions and instead play the next survival test version instead. It does have saving, and I seriously haven't decided what I want to do yet, so do leave your comments down below. Alright. With that out of the way, let's actually talk about this survival. What even is a survival? Well, while I've been over here building my Minecraft world in peace, Notch had other ideas in mind. All along, the plan for the game, as per Notch's intentions, always included more gameplay than what we've actually been working with so far, and the first step Notch actually took in the direction of making the sandbox into more of a proper game was with these survival test versions. The name comes from the change into what was described as a survival mode, characterized by the new presence of other mobs and the mortality of the player. Rather than just jumping in, because there's so much to talk about and so much changed, my plan is to just talk about everything first and actually experience it later. So let's get into it. The first survival test version released was Classic 0.24_survival_test, stylized exactly as such, and was released on September 1st, 2009. It was available to those who had already pre-purchased the game, and survival mode had seemingly been an ongoing project for Notch, having been alluded to as early as May 2009 on his Tumblr. When the update finally did ship to all 1,975 paid Minecraft players at the time, there were many changes to explore. First and most obvious when loading into the version, other than the addition of the player's fist in the lower right corner, is of course the addition of the hearts to the HUD. The whole point of survival was to add some challenge, and of course, this is only possible after giving the player some gameplay consequences such as death. Notch decided to use a health system consisting of 10 hearts that each themselves represented 2 health points. When your health drops from the full 20 points down to 0, you're presented with a new Game Over screen and are offered to try again with a new world. This no respawning philosophy mostly stems from the more arcadey nature of the game at this point in time, but for us, it mainly just means that we're going to have to make some backups so as to not lose all our progress in case of death. And alright, sure, the new death system is pretty punishing, but how could you actually die? Well, you begin to lose health when falling more than 3 blocks vertically and are able to gain it back by eating one of the mushrooms. I say one of the mushrooms because while the brown mushrooms heal 5 points, or 2.5 hearts, the red mushrooms deal 3 points, or 1.5 hearts of damage. This provides a good opportunity to do some thinking back to our fungal investigation we did back in episode 11. This does provide some more evidence in that, but really a more important mushroom-related change we should be focusing on is that they both no longer function exactly like the 2 flowers. Instead, the 2 mushrooms now decay if not on stone, cobblestone, or gravel, where previously they had to be placed on either dirt or grass blocks to survive. Getting back to ways to damage the player, along with mushrooms and falls, lava is now finally distinguishable from water with more than just its appearance. That's because any player or mob in lava will now take constant damage until they're able to escape or perish. Similarly, now when fully submerged in water, a player is able to see 10 bubbles that serve as a breath meter. Once the player runs out of air, you obviously start to drown, taking 2 damage points or a full heart of damage per second. Now, these are obviously not the only ways the player can be damaged, so let's just get into the meat of this update and talk about all the mobs that were added with this update as well. This isn't exactly the first time our world has seen some NPCs or non-player characters, as the very first time we experienced such a thing was the addition of these randomly walking around Steve or mobs with the very first update of the series. Those Steves do still exist, but can no longer be spawned in using the G key as of the advent of these survival test versions. Instead, we'll just have to turn our focus to the 4 new mobs being added in this update. I figure we can talk about the only passive one, the pig, first. The idea for mobs, by and large, was to have them attack and kill the player, but pigs simply act passively towards the player instead. They, like every mob added in this update, have the same amount of health as the player and when killed drop nothing. The same passive behavior is not found in any of the other mobs, such as the zombie, who is hostile towards the player, pathfinding towards them and chasing any players nearby, attempting to deal between 1 in 6 contact or melee damage. You might assume that skeletons would differ from the zombie, as that's how things work later on, but actually, at this time, that isn't the case. That's because skeletons in 0.24 survival test are, from what I can tell, completely identical to zombies. That's outside of their texture. But, of course, someone can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I say this because as far as I can tell, skeletons in 0.24 survival test are completely identical to zombies, outside of their texture, but of course someone can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. They really do both share a lot. including the ability to spawn in wearing what I described in a first draft of the script as iron armor, but I actually think seems to be referred to as plate armor, with 2 possible spawn options. Those being the option for skeletons or zombies to be armored with either a chest plate or a helmet. This plate armor is interestingly actually entirely visual, providing no real defense to the mobs in this version. There's also remnants of a visually distinct chain armor that went on to be unused in the game added at the same time. The last mob added in this update was the Creeper. If you're deep enough down the Minecraft rabbit hole to be watching this video, it probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. Did you know that the Creeper model came from Notch erroneously putting together the model for the pig? Well, on the very off chance you didn't know that that was how our beloved green exploding monster came about, there you go. Now, I will say, while this story does elucidate some things, namely why the creeper is shaped in the way that it is, the texture itself is perhaps still deserving of an explanation. The key to understanding it is a lot clearer when you look at the texture unfurled this way rather than looking at it all built together on the model. This way, it's a lot easier to see that what we're actually looking at is using the leaf block texture as an overlay. The idea, according to Notch, was that creepers would be sort of crunchy. Apparently, he really did imagine creepers as being made out of dry leaves, and I mean, sure, whatever you say, man. I just don't really understand how that then connects into making them a mob that explodes. Now, when I said that creepers exploded just then, you probably imagined the classic creeper sneaks up behind you and explodes all your stuff scenario. Funnily enough, in classic survival tests, that actually isn't how things worked. Instead, like zombies and skeletons, creepers as well simply attempt a path towards the player while trying to deal melee damage, this time between 2 and 6. In these versions, it was actually only upon death that creepers would explode. They begin to visibly flash when at low health, and at the point that all 20 of their HP is depleted, they fall over and explode, dealing damage to any surrounding mobs and the player, along with destroying and dropping surrounding blocks as items. The explosion deals up to 12 points or 6 full hearts of damage, and also does a serious amount of damage to the terrain, considering that each block has a different blast resistance, with dirt being particularly weak. In terms of other aspects to combat I've neglected to mention so far, it's possible for mobs and players to have knockback dealt to them, and all mobs briefly flash white when taking damage. It's also true that both players and mobs in these updates now share a dying animation, where the corpse, in quotation marks, falls to the ground. I should also clarify that mobs can drown and take fall damage just as well as the player. As well, when the player takes damage, the camera tilts in a specific direction so as to indicate the source of damage. I found this to be pretty hard to notice before having it pointed out to me, but pretty interesting nonetheless. Other than some smaller things, another big addition with this update is the score system. Weirdly, the player's score can only be seen after death, and killing each mob all rewards different amounts of points. To quickly break it down, zombies give 100 points, skeletons 100 points, creepers 250 points, and pigs 10 points. My understanding is that the intention was for points to be given only when mobs die to the player, whether that be through the player's melee attack or with the newly added arrows, though in the first version arrows are bugged and didn't actually work. Arrows can be accessed by the player by pressing the tab key, which will just fire a single arrow. There is no cooldown, and had arrows functioned properly, they would have dealt 3 damage or 1.5 hearts each. In this update, there's also no way for the player to get more arrows, so once they're gone, they're gone. I started out guessing it goes without saying, but I figure I should clarify, the player no longer has access to infinite quantities of any of the blocks in the game, so now when breaking blocks, most drop themselves. The exceptions are leaves, which have a 1 in 10 chance of dropping saplings, grass blocks which drop dirt, and logs which drop between 3 to 5 planks. The controls have also been changed to have right-click handle building and left-click handle breaking. This in turn removes the white selection box that used to appear when in build mode. And on top of that, the player's reach is reduced by 1 block, but I'm not sure if that was a related change. The B key that previously housed the inventory or build menu housing all the blocks to build with has, as of this update, been reassigned to a test function. Pressing B now spawns a sign entity into the world. The sign visually takes from the wood texture and has text on one side that reads, "This is a test of the signs. Each line can be 15 chars." Pretty self-explanatory. Signs actually can't be edited in this version, and a small test in novelty is thus essentially all they amount to. To cover some other minor changes, I mentioned a fix to mushrooms, but now their red and yellow flowers, along with saplings, no longer decay in darkness as well. Saplings now also actually have the ability to grow into a tree for the first time, granted there's enough space and it's placed on the right block. This update also changes the color of the sky slightly, on top of re-adding the ability to auto-jump. You can also no longer use R to respawn, which shouldn't really come as a shock, and similarly, the extremely useful liquid raising bug is also sadly but expectedly patched. A couple of minor changes were made to the options screen, namely the addition of a view bobbing option, but the main thing we've left for last was the fact that there were also some slight world generation changes made in this update. My goal with this series is to generate terrain for every different terrain generator, full stop, though I'm not gunning for the ultimate polyworld or anything, don't worry. For my purposes, as of Classic, this generator will be my last, completing a full 9 worlds in this little humble polyworld o' mine. As I already said, I'm going to leave the actual exploration of this new terrain for the next episode, but changes include longer and narrower caves, more cliffs, and a layer of lava at the bottom of the world to watch out for. And, alright, that's everything Classic 0.24_survival_test, now completely covered in full. With that, we're now ready to update our world to 0.24survivaltest_03, or the next version we can actually save our world in. So, with the next episode, before I go, I just want to say, thank you so much for watching. You making it all the way to the end of this video means a lot to me, and I really do truly appreciate it. Anyway, that's all for now. Bye!